radiyo mwumva ni radiyo Urumuri,
ijwi rya sosiyete sivile nyarwanda,
ijwi rya buri munyarwanda.
nusiba kumva radiyo Urumuri uzabeshwa byinshi.
Le mot me manque pour exprimer les chagrins de mon cœur. Larmes aux yeux, ton asikitika na kukupoteza. Kizito Mihigo, tu vas nous manquer. Wende salama mtoto wa mama, walio wako hatutakusahau. Je ne crois pas que la version de ta mort soit une réalité. Mais ce que je sais est que tu es martyr de la vérité. Wende salama tutakusahau. Uruhuka mahoro ntituzakwibagirwa. Wende salama tutakusahau. Kamahoro ntituzakwibagirwa.
Alisema Afrika tupendane, tugundane, Afrika tuungane because we are the one. Ilikuwa mahubiri ya Kizito niliyosikia tangu niko mtoto, kama mahubiri ya Yesu Kristo, penda jirani yako kama damu yako. Tu as laissé une histoire derrière toi. Malgré la génocide, tu es resté pour toi. Tu es l'espoir de la génération, de la réconciliation. Yeah. Pour tous les pacificateurs de notre région, tu es mon modèle. Oh, Wende Salama. Je ne crois pas que la version de ta mort soit une réalité. Oh, mais c'est que je sais que tu es martyr de la vérité.
Wende salama tutakusahau.
Wende
uruhuka mahoro ntituzakwibagirwa.
Mais toi tu
Wende salama tutakusahau. Uruhuka mahoro ntituzakwibagirwa.
Mihigo Kizito.
Wende salama tutakusahau. Uruhuka mahoro ntituzakwibagirwa. Wende salama tutakusahau. Uruhuka mahoro ntituzakwibagirwa. Mieux vaut mourir à combattre pour la liberté et la vérité plutôt que d'être prisonnier toute la vie. Kizito Mihigo, tu es un héros, reste une peace. Amahoro youth internments.
nature is able to bring them together so that they see that the struggle is often a shared one.
Profoundly, humanly, it's about connection.
I need a community of people that have been tortured, have been behind bars, that their home was taken away from them. So I can go to them and I can ask them, I can seek their advice.
We spend a lot of time discussing how we can practically make places safer, get people's stories out, fight the good fight.
Hack North Korea, organized by the Human Rights Foundation, brought 100 engineers, coders, activists, investors, and designers to get information into and possibly out of North Korea, airdropping a different kind of weapon, knowledge.
You see people who live in free societies actually coming genuinely to see how they can help others also become free in their own societies. And that's an opportunity that I am extremely grateful HFF has given me.
Our brain rewards us for extending our hands towards those in need. Perhaps the answer to the epidemic of anxiety and despair of our age is actually to extend our compassion. The future of freedom is the future of creativity, the future of our tools, the future of social impact, the future of positively affecting 1 billion people.
HRF has become that support system we've been looking for a while.
We're all connected. You are really fighting for humanity. Once we understand that, it's never us and them. It's all of us.
HRF is this extraordinary universal knitting machine that knits us all together.
What we're trying to do is link people throughout the world to know that they can have and make a difference. It's only when we choose to do this and put ourselves from empathy into compassion that we will actually be able to move the powers that be to do something similar.
Hello everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the 2020 Oslo Freedom Forum. Yesterday, you heard from individuals whose strength, courage, and determination have been tested, yet they have remained resilient in the face of oppression. Corrupt regimes around the world have exploited the COVID-19 pandemic to tighten restrictions on free speech, arrest peaceful protesters, and silence activists. Authoritarians in countries like Egypt and Hungary have pushed through constitutional amendments that give them far more power than necessary to deal with the health crisis. While in countries like Nicaragua and Belarus, they refuse to even acknowledge the existence of the virus. But the individuals featured on this stage have all moved forward with renewed optimism, meaning, and purpose, standing tall against tyranny. And we will be continuing this theme today with more stories from around the world that exhibit the acute ability of individuals to cultivate and learn resilience, to adapt to particular circumstances, and to practice that resilience together as a community. The inspiring young woman, Fatou Toufa Jallow, was raped by Gambia's dictator. But she refused to be a victim. She escaped and reasserted her power by speaking up on behalf of the whole country against a system that tolerates rape and impunity for such a crime. Nathan Law was almost crushed by the Chinese government, which saw him as a threat for his leadership during the umbrella movement and his successful election as the youngest lawmaker in the history of the Legislative Council of Hong Kong. But he continues to stand up to China and today advocates tirelessly for the freedom of his homeland. Ludmila Savchuk took on Putin's regime to uncover its poisonous propaganda networks and ensure that citizens around the world have access to honest public debates and respectful communication. Uni Park put her life at risk when she escaped North Korea in search of freedom. She found it in South Korea and continues to advocate on behalf of millions who are kept in the dark back home. These are the stories that keep us going. These are the heroes who give us hope that we can make this world more free and more fair. Some of them we have unfortunately lost since our last gathering at the Oslo Freedom Forum in Norway. Lina Bermhenny was an incredible example of personal resilience. She's often described as one of the bravest bloggers in the world, whose work was instrumental in documenting and mobilizing citizens during the 2011 Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, all while battling a chronic illness. Her impactful achievements earned her the 2011 Nobel Peace Prize nomination. And Suleiman Bakhit was a Jordanian artist and human rights activist who dedicated his life to creating stories and heroes that promoted tolerance and empowerment of women and girls by providing Arab youth with positive role models. Today, we celebrate the important work that they and countless others have done to support freedom and democracy in their countries. But the fight for freedom is eternal. It requires eternal vigilance. Freedom is precious and needs to be defended. All over the world, people are fighting for their fundamental rights in the face of oppressive governments. Even as technology changes, ushering in a new era of corruption, social engineering, and mass surveillance, activists and human rights defenders have found new ways to stand up to oppressors, using encrypted communications, digital currency, and new strategies of protest to combat ruthless dictatorships. In this critical moment for activism, we continue to recognize the courage and resilience of those who risk their lives every day doing this vital task. We hope you'll be inspired by today's speakers and that you'll find new ways of uniting for the common cause of democracy.
I was born in 1996, 2 years after Yahya Jammeh seized power in a military coup. Jammeh would end up ruling Gambia as a dictator for 22 years, almost the entire length of my life. As a child, I learned that Jammeh was the president through popular songs, among many things. I can still remember the echoes of voices of adults and children singing the praises of our beloved president. When we turned on the TV, we would only see his face. And each time his face appeared, so did all of his presidential titles. Every Gambian can recite these from memory. His Excellency, Sheikh Professor, Dr. Alhaji, Yahya Abdul Aziz, James Junkung Jammeh, Nasiruddin Babili Mansa. I also remember when we were in nursery school and feasting on large servings of free food paid for by the president as an annual gift to struggling schools. We didn't have books or desks to use at school, but the president, as he would call it, would dash us with his presidential party money. The first time I personally saw Yahya Jammeh in person was from a distance. He came all the way to my city of Brikama for a political rally, an hour away from Banjul. I remember standing there with a mango in my right hand and salt and pepper in the other as his motorcade passed through my neighborhood. Crowds lined up to watch him. He threw us t-shirts, biscuits, and so on. I experienced his might and power on full display, but I never thought I'd ever come in close contact with him. In my social circles, people rarely never speak about the president in negative terms. The first time I genuinely and consciously understood that I was living in a dictatorship was around 2010. I was a teenager volunteering at the Red Cross, and I overheard an argument between two people, and one of them was speaking in opposition to the president. I was surprised. On other occasions, like in schools, I noticed my teacher, Mr. Adaye, would refer to Canada as a democracy, for example, and Libya as a dictatorship. But he will never specifically categorize Gambia. He would often say, we were able to figure out for ourselves in what type of government we lived in. Slowly, these things began to click in my mind and sparked my curiosity. But being from a poor family, the idea of going to the internet cafe to Google the president was a luxury I could not afford. Like most of my friends, we kept our bubble of school activities, theater, debate competitions, popular culture and sports. And then I headed to college. My friends inspired me to participate in a beauty pageant organized by the president's office. It was terribly exciting. I was happy because it was an opportunity to win a full scholarship to any university in the world and funding for community projects of my choice. And so on December 5th of 2014, I stood on a nationally televised stage with 22 other contestants, and I won. My family and friends cheered with joy as I talked about my plans for community projects. When I accepted the crown from the previous winner, I remember looking into the crowd with tears of joy streaming down my face. My dreams of pursuing my studies and education were becoming a reality, and the future appeared full of possibilities. All the winning contestants were required to pay a courtesy visit to the president. There I was, months after winning, sitting in the State House of the Gambia, meeting the president along with other girls. From Yahya Jammeh, we had words of encouragement, advice, and felt his concern for our future, genuinely. Looking back now, that moment felt safe. It felt right. It was everything a young woman should expect from the top government officials of her nation. Over the next months, I received frequent invitations to join the president at public functions with other girls, and then to meet him to discuss the projects that we were working on. I often felt pressure to accept such invitations. For instance, armed military having to pick me up at the rehearsals when I decided I did not want to go. But even so, I considered Jammeh a father figure. Then in May of 2015, the president invited me to discuss community projects. And suddenly he simply said, I want to marry you. Like a command. I giggled, thinking it was a prank. And then I said, how? No, you're my father's age. I was thinking to myself, hell no. The president said, I think you understand what I mean, but I'll give you more time to think about it. The president of an entire country found my no to be disrespectful. Too much ownership of self coming from a nobody. And so a man who could not accept rejection from a young woman decided that he would inflict pain by drugging and raping me. He raped me. It's a sentence I could only say years later. I felt broken, devastated, and violated. I was ashamed and could not go to anyone, not even my mother. Not because I was scared that she would not believe me, but because I knew she could not do anything about it. But worse, I was being followed and even asked to be taken back to him again, taken back to that moment. My next instinct was to run away through boats and being in cars filled with cattle, and disguised in my hijab, I fled to Senegal and later obtained asylum in Canada, a place I call home now. I found myself in a city with no family, having to start from scratch and dealing with the weight of what has just happened, knowing I could not say anything. And from the day it happened, and for the first 2 years, I kept telling myself it did not happen at all. I told myself life goes on. And I didn't want people to know this happened to me because I thought, just like many other survivors, that I am better than this. I was also afraid. I feared Jammeh, and I feared what might happen to me and to my family. I was safe, but they weren't. From exile, it was very clear that Jammeh was a brutal dictator, and what he was capable of, arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings, and forced disappearances were all commonplace in the Gambia. Jammeh once said he would rule the Gambia for 1 billion years and only God could remove him. But deeper than that, I didn't want to be seen as the person who was raped by the president. And so I pretended like my life went on. But soon I realized that I wasn't living. My life was on pause. I have been this vibrant young person interested in theater and community work, but that girl was gone. For some reason, I felt like I owed it to myself and the perpetrator to hide the story, to protect our little secret. When I decided to get help, I went to therapy. And I realized how important it is to talk to someone who can listen and not judge. That led me to so many questions. What does a survivor in Gambia do? If you cannot confide in your mom or your grandmother, how does that even work? Where do Gambian survivors, victims go to for help? I jumped on my computer to search for survivors in Gambia. I searched for articles and tried to find people who had shared their stories. I could not find a single person who had their face behind their stories. Not a single rape survivor in the Gambia that was visible. I remember sitting there and starting to ask myself these questions and staring at statistics from World Health Organization and United Nations. All of these statistics, but no actual human representation. I came across a few websites where people could go to anonymously share their stories. And there I read hundreds and hundreds of stories of sexual abuse survivors and stories that sounded familiar. Stories of abusive uncles and workplace harassment. I remember breaking down and saying, we are here, a lot of us, in a country of less than 2 million people. It was a life-changing moment for me, staring at the screen and realizing that if I were back in the Gambia and this happened to me, speaking out would not be an option, regardless of who my perpetrator was. This jolted me out of my previous mindset. I saw a picture bigger than myself and my desire to protect my image and purity and sanctity, confined within the expectation of religion and society. I felt like I did not want to be another statistic. Speaking out anonymously was easy, but not enough. There were already so many anonymous stories out there. And if people can't see the human being behind the story, then they're just anonymous tales dehumanized. So I decided that I will not hide behind fear anymore, that I was going to take back that power, no matter how difficult that might be. My power now. So I started talking to my therapist, and she warned me about the consequences of speaking out. You're going to be buried and re-victimized millions more times, she said. I had to build my strength to re-survive again and again and again. It took me more than another year and a half before I could feel like I was ready. Meanwhile, it was 2016, and the next presidential election was coming up in the Gambia. With the help of Gambian diaspora, opposition leaders came together to support a single candidate to run against Jammeh. We all expected Jammeh to rig the elections and win again. He had cheated every time. It was unthinkable that he would allow the true election results to be announced. But against all odds, Barrow won the elections. Gambians welcomed the news with even more disbelief. When Jammeh appeared on TV to concede to Barrow for a few short weeks in early 2017, Jammeh, however, defied regional and international appeals to step down whilst cracking down on protests led by the hashtag Gambia Has Decided campaign. Troops and protesters flooded the streets. Worried Gambians abroad calling their families day in and out. And I was one of them, across the Atlantic Ocean in my Toronto apartment. Finally, the dictator was forced out by a military intervention of troops mandated by the West African regional bloc of countries. Jammeh was gone, accepting defeat and exile in a different dictatorship, Equatorial Guinea. I remember feeling happy at the possibility of freedom, the end of life as a refugee, and longing to be in my mother's arms again. I became the first survivor of sexual violence to speak out without hiding my identity. My publicized New York Times story and multiple human rights reports inspired the hashtag #IamTufa, similar to the Me Too movement. To my horror, I learned of 3 other women with similar stories, and to realize that I was not alone. And in July of 2019, I led the first ever march against sexual violence in the Gambia. Dozens of men and women joined as we marched peacefully in the streets to make our voices heard. It was an incredible milestone. The Gambia has since set up a Truth, Reconciliation and Reparations Commissions to investigate the crimes of the Jammeh regime. And I told my story as vividly as I could to a society that never discusses rape. One of the things I realized in telling my story is that local languages in the Gambia don't have terms for rape or sexual violence. For example, when I asked my youngest sister if she knew how to say rape in Fuller, our language, she could only scratch her head. Literally, only my grandmother knew the words. And those words are rarely used. And when used, they sanitize sexual violence. The way to say someone raped me is to say someone robbed off of me or someone fell on me. Sometimes a girl might speak up, but with this language, she will not be taken seriously. And many a times, the response is, get over it. Fall right back at him. This is how we express violations on women's bodies. Imagine me walking to my mom to say,
igikanu kimaga umusore w'igituza gihanitse ibyuma rutegesha rwakamanzi ndimwe y'amashyengo gahore mwana wanjye uzaba intwari
ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ngiye kurugutura uzarubera intwari uzaba ingenzi wunganira imanzi uzaba ingenzi wusa ikivi kimena mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ngiye kurugutura uzarubera intwari uzaba ingenzi wunganira imanzi uzaba ingenzi wusa ikivi kimena kibondo ngiyi impano iruta izindi igihugu cyacu Imana yaduhaye tutabiyisabye tutanabihisemo twavutse dusanga turi abanyarwanda dusigasire uwo murage mwiza twahawe n'iyaduhanze idukunze ikatwifuriza ineza ikaturaga umunezero mwana wanjye saro ryanjye ntuzabogora ayo mata y'urwererane mu nkongoro y'ibwami umwami uruta abandi yaduterekeye ku ruhimbi ese natubona ngeze imana irenze kuririmba kuwa turukesha niwe umuhanzi mukuru n'Imana mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ngiye kurugutura uzarubera intwari uzaba ingenzi wunganira imanzi uzaba ingenzi wusa ikivi kimena mwana wanjye aho uzajya uba uri hose ujye wibuka ko nawe uhamagariwe kuba intwari ubutwari twese buratureba ntibikiri iby'abayobozi b'igihugu bonyine cyangwa ingabo zikirinda nawe muganga b'intwari uvura abantu mwarimu nawe urera uzirikana cyane ko ari wowe mushumba w'intwari z'urwejo niba uri umuhanzi w'indirimbo izakubera inzira y'ubutwari niba uri umukinnyi w'umupira izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe mworozi nawe muhinzi izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe usudira nawe mukanishi izakubera niba uri umukinnyi w'umupira izakubera padiri furere n'umubikira wowe mworozi nawe muhinzi pasitoro poroferi wowe usudira nawe mukanishi wowe ushinzwe isuku n'isukura izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe utwara abantu mu muhanda izakubera inzira y'ubutwari mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu
здоровье и даже жизнь. Стоит ли его послание такой цены? Я записываю свою речь в те дни, когда отравлен Алексей Навальный, российский политик, отравлен ядом, который преподносится всем серьезным противникам режима Путина. В русском языке слова «травить» и «отравить» однородные, слова родственники, звучат они практически одинаково. Отравить – это в смысле дать яд противнику с целью убить или навредить здоровью, а отравить – это по-английски буллинг, то есть преследовать, убивать противника в моральном смысле. Травить в смысле преследовать морально и травить в смысле убивать физически. Мне кажется, в этом смысл того, что происходит у нас сейчас, вокруг нас. Это мы почувствовали уже давно. Я уже работала лет 15 журналистом к тому времени, когда начала слышать о фабрике троллей, а также я была активной экологической активисткой и общалась с ребятами, местными активистами в Петербурге, которых уже тогда, 5 лет назад, начали преследовать и травить в интернете какие-то аккаунты людей, которых они не знают и с которыми никак больше, они не могли их найти, например. То есть это были какие-то несуществующие аккаунты. Мы тогда уже начали слышать о том, что уже начали писать журналисты о том, что работает фабрика троллей в Петербурге. Фабрика, производящая круглосуточно платные комментарии в интернете про путинские и поливающая грязью любых противников существующей системы. 5 лет назад, когда я туда внедрилась под видом сотрудника, под прикрытием, она представляла собой большое офисное здание, многоэтажное. Мне удалось туда внедриться, пройти все собеседования. И что я увидела, поразило меня прежде всего своим масштабом. Фабрика троллей управляется из администрации президента. Это к моменту моего прихода на фабрику, моей работы там под прикрытием, уже было известно, что она управляется и финансируется из Кремля, потому что хакеры уже выложили большой пласт документов о фабрике. Я знала, что фабрикой владеет местный бизнесмен из путинского окружения, господин Евгений Пригожин, о котором вы сейчас, возможно, тоже часто слышите в связи с именем Навального. Я напомню, что фабрика работала тогда и работают сейчас люди круглосуточно, у них нет ни праздников, ни выходных. Они каждый получают техническое задание, получают нормы выработки, то есть столько, сколько они должны за свой день работы или за свою ночь работы сделать комментариев или постов, или картинок, или видео. Мне удалось как раз увидеть, как рождается пропаганда, самое ее зерно. Суть работы тролля, пропагандиста на этой фабрике, это поддерживать жизнь множества аккаунтов. Эти аккаунты в Твиттере, Фейсбуке, ВКонтакте и других социальных сетях, на множестве форумов, на сайтах СМИ. С фейковых этих аккаунтов они пишут то, что им присылается на компьютеры, либо говорится устно начальниками. На каждом компьютере у каждого пропагандиста есть список тем, по которым они работают каждый день, и где-то штук 10. Я хочу привести пример, как работает российская пропаганда в случае с Алексеем Навальным. 5 лет назад проблема и режима тоже был Алексей Навальный, как и сегодня. И в один из дней, когда я пребывала на фабрике, там пришло такое задание написать об Алексее Навальном, что он вышел на улицу из-под домашнего ареста, если я точно помню, купил молоко и возмутился ростом цен на продукты. И девушка-руководитель как раз объясняла, как нужно писать. Она села и сходу начала сочинять о том, что на самом деле Навальный алкоголик, и поэтому, значит, он не смог купить себе молоко, потому что ему и так не хватает на водку. То есть я увидела, что пропагандист просто не то что извращает факты, не только извращает, но и полностью их сочиняет. Опасность этой пропагандистской работы, в отличие, например, от телевидения путинского, в том, что она притворяется обычным человеческим обменом информацией между людьми. То есть у вас на Фейсбуке вполне могут быть друзья, которые не существуют на самом деле, либо они существуют, но получают зарплату за то, чтобы влиять на ваш мозг. Например, я видела, как на фабрике троллей создают фейковые, допустим, аккаунты качков, которые там рекомендуют здоровый образ жизни, и между делом говорят о том, как плохи дела на Украине. Или делают обзоры новинок кино, и между делом вкрапливают там небольшую фразу о том, что, ну, вы понимаете, что Америка идет к гибели, и вот как раз вышел фильм, который нам рассказывает об этом. Фильм «Катастрофа». Когда я пришла, внедрилась на эту фабрику, у меня была такая простая детская, наверное, наивная мечта. Я думала, что как в нормальной стране, в нормальном мире. Я сейчас внедрюсь туда, покажу их методики, как они работают, что они на самом деле делают, и фабрика будет разоблачена и закрыта. Когда я приняла решение говорить об этой проблеме открыто, я понимала опасность того, что я делаю. Ну, я была готова к этому. Вернее, нет, к этому никто не готов. Когда я вышла из фабрики троллей, собрав всю информацию, которую я смогла собрать, и все документы, тогда я и принимала свое решение, готова ли я рискнуть как минимум своим покоем и своей той жизнью спокойной, которая у меня была. Я приняла решение открыть свое имя и открыто говорить об этой проблеме. Было множество изданий, с которыми я работала, о котором я рассказывала о проблеме, надеясь о том, что как можно больше людей узнает о проблеме пропаганды. Что началось? Начались угрозы, началась травля и со стороны троллей, и со стороны российских СМИ. Угрозы, звонки, там, намеки, там, что там, как твои дети, а не боишься ли ты, что тебя убьют, звонки моим родственникам. В общем, весь набор, который ожидает российского оппозиционера в таких случаях. Я хочу сказать, что сегодня каждый из нас отравлен той информацией, теми речами ненависти, которые вокруг нас. Проблема в том, что мы отравлены настолько, я отравлена, мы все отравлены, что даже когда отравили Навального, в буквальном смысле физически, мы настолько уже, боюсь сказать, привыкли к этому. То есть это уже нормально в нашем мире, в нашей стране. И я хочу, чтобы это стало ненормальным. Я хочу, чтобы это было из ряда вон выходящим. Я хочу, чтобы это было настолько ненормальным и абсурдным, чтобы сотни тысяч, миллионы людей встали и начали протестовать, чтобы это прекратилось, чтобы прекратили травить, давая яд, и прекратили давая информационный яд. Мы живем на грани, и я не хочу больше так жить. Я хочу, чтобы каждый из вас, сидя вот вы сидите на стуле, на диване, вы как-то смотрите конференцию, я хочу, чтобы вы задумались о своем месте. Мы так ненадолго, на самом деле, приходим в этот мир, и я не хочу, чтобы мы были отравлены или производили травлю друг друга. Я хочу, чтобы мы делали этот мир немножечко лучше.
Most of you must have heard of Kobe Bryant. Maybe you are a fan of him. He was such a successful athlete and leader. He was once asked by a reporter about his success, and Kobe Bryant replied, "Have you seen Los Angeles at 4 a.m.? It became one of his well-known quotations. He woke up very early and started training. That's why he was so successful. For me, of course, I've never seen 4 a.m. LA, but I've seen the hearts of Hong Kong at 4 a.m. During the Umbrella Movement in 2014, people camped on the busiest highway in Hong Kong, and it was quiet and peaceful. I was there at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m. I was there. The protest zone was surrounded by skyscrapers and the most expensive offices in the world. That was the first time I witnessed the power of people, but I also experienced the strength of the autocracy. After we occupied the major runways of Hong Kong for 79 days, after hundreds of thousands of people marched peacefully week after week, the government refused to listen to our pleas for democracy. Hong Kong people have been fighting for democracy for over 3 decades, yet Beijing still refused to implement it. For me, the Umbrella Movement was the beginning of my involvement in activism. Many consider politics as some game for old people who have some special interests and desire for power, but I saw it in a different way. As an activist, as a political leader, my vocation is to empower individuals in society and to fight for social justice that benefits the most vulnerable. My role is to inject youth energy into politics, empower people, and to give them hope. After my role as a student leader in 2014, I formed a youth-led party, Demosisto, with Joshua Wong, another prominent student leader back then. I became a politician. I ran for election in 2016 as a complete underdog. No one expected me to win. A month before the election, I only had 1% of support. And the prediction is that you need to get at least 6 to 7% of the vote in the election to win, because there are 15 candidates running for 6 seats. To everyone's surprise, I ultimately obtained the second highest vote in my region with more than 50,000 votes. So at the age of 23, I was the youngest elected legislator in Hong Kong's history. After my victory in the election and serving the council for less than a year, the Chinese Communist Party distorted the legal system and unseated me. Let me explain how they did that. There was a council tradition to make a political statement during the swearing-in section, the oath-taking. I chose to quote Gandhi and stated that I served the people of Hong Kong and that I would not submit myself to the regime that brutally kills its people. The government basically reinterpreted Hong Kong's constitution and applied it retrospectively, and therefore creating a legal loophole to eject legislators that they don't like. And so, despite being elected by the people, the CCP had me removed from my elected position. They did this to a few others as well. Nonetheless, this wasn't the worst thing that happened on me. 1 month later, in August 2017, I was jailed for my participation in the peaceful Umbrella Movement 3 years earlier. And so, along with Joshua Wong, Alex Chow, my colleagues in the Umbrella Movement, we became the first batch of political prisoners in Hong Kong since the 1997 handover. I was 24 years old. I spent around 68 days in that prison where I felt depressed and wondered deeply, is there a message that my turbulent life wants to teach me? In prison, there are only routines. There are no surprises. Eat, rest, run, work, eat,
ntibikiri iby'abayobozi
sleep.
b'igihugu bonyine
Every day
cyangwa ingabo
is a
zikirinda.
cycle
Nawe
and nothing
muganga
new can be
w'intwaro
expected.
uvura abantu,
The best you could hope
mwarimu
for
nawe urebe
is to stay
uzirikana
clear
cyane
from the
ko ari wowe
fights
mushumba
and make sure
w'intwari
no one
z'urwejo.
is going after you. Being put in prison for engaging in peaceful protests was devastating, but I always try to look at the good things in bad times. One very positive thing from my time in jail was that I was free from my iPhone. The distraction of social media and electronic appliances was no longer present. I could focus on questioning myself and thinking ahead. My time in prison made me more humble, more calm, more patient, and also more observant. I've come to realize that these are the traits that can make me a better politician. Sympathy, empathy, and the ability to understand others' situation and their pains. Respect for others, even though they have different opinions, and the ability to unite people with differences to strive for the same goal. And most of all, patience. It's often inevitable for political activists to be jailed under an autocratic regime. If you can overcome this hurdle peacefully, then it's a signal that you indeed possesses the mental strength and tenacity that your position requires. After the experience of jail, I was inspired to return to university and study. I became more eager to learn, and this made me more capable of finding a solution for future problems. I finished my degree and then departed for a master program at Yale in August 2019. 2 months after the massive anti-extradition movement started. The anti-extradition protests began when the Hong Kong government insists on passing a law that would allow the extradition of anyone the CCP desires to China, where there is no rule of law. During these chaotic but encouraging times, we say, be water. While millions in Hong Kong protested in the streets, I spent most of my time in the United States to build up consensus across the political aisles. I attended congressional hearings, meeting with politicians, and had school speaking tours and conferences. I did whatever I could to raise awareness. By making Hong Kong issue high profile and by building consensus in the US, we could garner far more support from the international community. I could help Hong Kong even though I was not there. Since the beginning of last year's protest movement, more than 9,000 people were arrested, and hundreds of them are facing many years in prison. The prospect is horrifying. I felt a duty to speak up for them, to be the voice of the unheard. So I decided to run for the Legislative Council election again in 2020, even though I knew the government would disqualify me again. Sadly, I didn't make it to the election because I went into exile when the brutal national security law was put in place on the 1st of July this year. Beijing says that the law is a gift to Hong Kong, but it's really the poison from the devil. The law allows Beijing to prosecute Hong Kong dissidents at their will and morph the whole legal system of Hong Kong into the Chinese shape, with a lack of judicial independence and fairness. If I were staying in Hong Kong under the law, I would face up to the life imprisonment or even extradition to mainland China. That's why I went into life in exile. Not long ago, Chinese state media announced that I am a wanted fugitive under the national security law, just because I encourage the world to hold Chinese Communist Party accountable, to pressure them to eliminate the human rights violation in their country. For the time being, I have no way back. I have severed my ties with my families in order to protect them. My heart is broken. I'm not in my home, the place that I grew up in, and I've set a seemingly eternal goodbye to all the things that I treasure and love on the ground. But I have no regrets. There are always personal sacrifices on the road to justice. The important thing is to have a clear objective and not to feel defeated when in the face of difficult odds. I still become very emotional when I talk about Hong Kong protests. It's inspiring and encouraging, but many people have suffered. So many of us in this struggle against the CCP live under the identity of Hong Kongers because we can feel each other. We feel the pain when a Hong Kong protester gets shot. We feel the pain when a Hong Kong protester gets sentenced for years and their families are crying. We feel the pain when a Hong Kong protester is feeling hopeless and jumps off a roof. The sense of community and unity makes us stronger. It makes us more than one individual. And it also makes life heavier, adding more weight on our shoulders because we are no longer walking for ourselves, but for a belief and faith that many of our fellow people share. I hope you, wherever you're watching from, can stand with us too, can walk with us and support our movement until the dawn arrives and the sunlight penetrates the heavy dark clouds above all of us. Please share all the news you see about Hong Kong, whether it's on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Please help us amplify our voices. Please boycott all Chinese software that surveil you and import authoritarianism into your country. Stop using TikTok, stop using Zoom, stop using WeChat, stop using Alibaba. Don't watch Mulan. You are being fooled into using their software, buying their products, and giving them the financial means with which to destroy freedom around the world. You are giving the Chinese Communist Party more power. Please urge your democratic governments to take actions to restrict the political expansion of the Chinese Communist Party. I hope that in my lifetime, I can see the gorgeous skyline above Victoria Harbour and the smile of my fellow Hong Kong people once again. I have captured and imprinted the moment when I sat on the plane. The very last time I saw the night view of Hong Kong from above the sky. It's beautiful. Please stand with Hong Kong, fight for freedom. 光復香港，時代革命。Thank you for listening.
Hi, my name is Brian Fogel. I'm thrilled to be at the Oslo Freedom Forum, speaking here again this year. Last year, I came to speak about my journey in making Icarus, the Academy Award-winning documentary of 2018 that blew the lid off of Russia's decades-long doping program. In the film, Grigory Rodchenkov, who was the WADA lab director behind doping dozens of Russian athletes, fled to the United States, seeking protection by the US government against Putin's regime. At the Oslo Freedom Forum, I spoke about that journey of protecting Grigory and bringing the film forward to the world. This year, I'm very proud to be releasing The Dissident. The Dissident focuses on the untold story of the murder of Washington Post and Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi on October 2nd, 2018 at the Saudi consulate of Istanbul. The making of this film was quite a journey. And as I set out on this journey, Thor Halvorsen and I met, and I realized that my goals as a filmmaker and the goals of the Human Rights Foundation were aligned. I wanted to tell stories of truth and seek justice for those that were oppressed, and the Human Rights Foundation sought to tell those same stories. Thor and I locked forces and produced The Dissident together, which will release globally in December of this year. I'm thrilled to be able to show you guys the trailer to the film today and also speak upon my journey of making this film. What came to me very early after the murder of Jamal was that there was a false narrative being painted of Jamal by the Saudi government, in which the United States and other countries were also complicit. What was coming forward in the media was that Jamal Khashoggi was a Muslim Brotherhood, that he was a terrorist sympathizer, that he was essentially a threat to Saudi Arabia and deserved to be assassinated. As I dug into this story, I found that nothing could be further from the truth. Jamal was a journalist. Jamal sought freedom of press and freedom of speech in his country. And Jamal was active in exposing what Saudi Arabia had been doing on Twitter, which is essentially creating tens of thousands of false accounts to push forward MBS's Vision 2020 and false objective for the country. In working on this project, I came across Omar Abdulaziz, who today has been awarded the Vaclav Havel Prize. I know I am mispronouncing that. I apologize for his work in exposing Saudi's takeover of Twitter within their country. Along this journey, I came to understand that freedom of speech and expression is in constant jeopardy in countries such as Saudi Arabia. And I felt compelled to bring this narrative and this film to light. Along the journey, I worked with Hatice Cengiz, Jamal's fiancée, who he sought to marry as he entered the consulate on that fateful day. I worked with Agnes Callamard, the UN Special Rapporteur, who investigated the crime for the United Nations, which has still failed to seek any justice in his murder or bring forward any charges against Saudi Arabia. I worked with the Washington Post and their journalists who had covered this story so boldly. And perhaps most importantly, I worked with the Turkish investigators and prosecutors who have relentlessly sought justice for Jamal's murder. In so doing, they provided me with the transcript of Jamal's crime, which have not been released to the world. And they provided me with their police footage and other evidence regarding the murder. It's my hope that justice will one day come for Jamal. While I understand that it is unlikely that MBS will cede to the throne, it is my hope that governments around the world will take action against this regime that has sought to not only assassinate Jamal, but has imprisoned so many others. There are women sitting in prisons in Saudi Arabia, such as Lujan Hatul. There have been other assassination attempts made on Saudi dissidents around the globe. And this sort of action must be stopped. What is at stake here is freedom of speech and press. And it's my hope that The Dissident will bring this story forward to the world and allow leaders, as they attend the G20 in November, understand that they are doing business with a murderer. I hope that this film can change the public perception and also shine a brighter light on the crimes against humanity that are taking place in Saudi Arabia.
My name is Hatice Cengiz. I am addressing you as a victim. A title forced on me after the brutal murder of my Jamal.
Jamal Khashoggi, prominent Saudi journalist and Washington Post columnist, has gone missing after visiting his country's consulate in Istanbul.
He was last seen entering Saudi Arabia's consulate seeking paperwork to marry his fiancée.
His fiancée saw him go in at 1 p.m. and was still waiting for him at 1 a.m.
Buhar olup uçmadı.
Saudi Arabia now suddenly is admitting that Khashoggi did die inside that building.
Cemal Kaşıkçı alelade bir şekilde öldürülmemiştir.
The government treated me as if I shot the king.
We knew that they would try to sweep the whole thing under the rug.
Is it true that Turkish intelligence obtained audio recordings of Khashoggi's murder?
I know why Jamal was killed. It's because of me.
Birileri tüm olup biteni rahatlıkla seyretmiş, hatta talimatlar vermiş olabilir.
We saved some particularly damning piece of the puzzle, like Saudi body double.
Jamal felt the whole country was against him, but this is not the truth. I said the best solution is create our own army.
The king firmly denies any knowledge of it. It could have been rogue killers. Who knows?
I just received this. Be careful. Move from city to another one, and there's a team is going to kill you soon. It's anonymous.
He has to be killed in a way that will send message to everyone else. Because if you kill Jamal with his paper, who else you cannot kill? You can kill everyone.
I warned Jamal. Once you start working with us, you're not just a journalist, you're a dissident. What do you know about the beast?
Thank you for joining us today at our first ever virtual Oslo Freedom Forum, where together we are celebrating human rights and exposing tyranny, censorship, and corruption around the world. We are expanding freedom and unleashing human potential across the globe. Together, we are resilient. We will now have a short intermission break. Please take this time to grab a quick snack, stretch your legs, and to get ready for more exciting and inspiring talks. During intermission, we will be airing a few videos featuring the Human Rights Foundation's impactful programs. The first video we will be sharing is of our Hong Kong desk. Hong Kongers are facing a very difficult and dangerous time as the Chinese government continues to utilize various tools from its authoritarian toolbox to suppress their voices and to encroach on their freedoms. For more than 2 decades, ever since Hong Kong was handed back to China in 1997, the people of Hong Kong have urged the international community to pay more attention to the Chinese government's tightening control on their city. Our Hong Kong desk is a project that aims to raise further awareness of the Hong Kong government's and the Chinese government's suppression of civil liberties and human rights violations. We have advocated on behalf of political prisoners in the city, as well as highlighted police brutality in our international advocacy programs. We have utilized social media and written high-impact op-eds to keep the Hong Kongers' struggle for democracy in the global spotlight. Through various forms of international advocacy and by producing impactful research and reports, we remain committed to holding all perpetrators of human rights abuses accountable. Historically, Hong Kong has long been seen as the gateway of Asia to the world. What is happening right now in Hong Kong has global implications, which makes it even more important that we must stand with those in Hong Kong fighting for their freedoms. Will you join us?
One day, I saw 2 police officers badly beating up this woman who had a baby on her back, and everyone was passing by. No one would say anything. No one would stop to help that woman. And then a thought occurred to me. I said, well, I have to travel tomorrow. I decided that day that I would not risk my trip abroad, and I turned my back and I walked away. The two police officers somehow stopped beating up the woman and came after me. I was arrested anyway. That gave me a lesson. My silence would not spare me from injustice. My name is Rafael Marques de Moraes. I'm an Angolan citizen, journalist, and human rights defender. My country had a war for 27 years, and I realized very little was being done to ensure that there was some respect for life. Seeing someone being shot in the street was like a normal event, and I wanted to help change that culture. The diamond trade played a pivotal role in the war, and the levels of violence were just unspeakable. The government awarded much of the land as diamond concessions, and those lands include the farms from local people. Some of the cases I had to report were people being tortured, killed, going to their own farms. An international narrative that built around the UN-sponsored Kimberley process essentially sponsored the idea that only diamonds harvested by rebel movements were blood diamonds, and any diamonds harvested by government forces, those diamonds were clean. The government was the main culprit of human rights abuses, but it had the backing of the international community. So what the generals did was just to let the war go for longer so that they could profit. And it was a billion-dollar-a-year industry from just mining with shovels. What is sad is that where you find more natural resources, you're more likely to find more poverty. There needs to be regular reporting on this kind of violence, on how it is affecting local communities that are not allowed to do anything. And that's why it's important as a journalist dealing with repression, I had to take a step farther and not just say, well, this is what happened, but actually as a citizen, engage in activism to ensure that the voice of the people on the ground were heard. The way the government has always privileged diamond exploration over people's well-being, it's still in itself a matter of human rights abuses because people are more important than resources. And if those resources are taken from that region, the very first to benefit should be the local people, and they benefit nothing from the diamond exploration. Being an activist in Angola means to help create that very space of openness and democracy to have a normal life. We all live better off if everyone has the basics. And fighting for that change, fighting for justice, that's the bottom line.
When I was there living in China in August 2016, they asked all of the population to attend a free body check test. And they asked us to our blood be tested, our face scanned, and our voice to be recorded. I asked the local officials, can I see the results of those tests? They told me, you don't have any right to ask about the result. If you want to know, you can ask the police. It means that it's not about the benefit or good of the people. It's being used for some untold purpose of the Chinese government. My name is Tahir Iman. I am a member of Uyghur ethnic nation in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region.
So Xinjiang is in far western China, where there is a Turkic minority living there, among other minorities in China known as the Uyghurs. It's a very different part of China. It doesn't really look like Beijing or Shanghai at all. It's much closer topographically and culturally to Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Uyghurs are predominantly Muslim. They speak a different language. Everything is different from Han Chinese people. In 2016, the Chinese Communist government created a big police state in the region.
Living in that region itself feels very much like an open-air prison. When you get up in the morning and you commute to work, you'll be stopped at a checkpoint and have your cell phone messages searched. When you apply for a passport, you might be asked for a strand of hair or an eyelash for a DNA database, or asked to take a 360-degree portrait for facial recognition cameras.
Those DNA collection and face recognition system and other surveillance technology became only one part of their oppressive and ethnic cleansing strategy on the region. They created a large amount of camps to arrest and detain the people.
According to the UN, as much as 1 million Uyghurs are now in these detention centers that the Chinese call political re-education centers or even vocational training centers, as if they've moved these Uyghurs into these centers to provide them professional help and work training.
They are sent to those camps to renounce their religious and their national ethnic identity. Last May, the Chinese police official, they contacted me. They asked me to cooperate with Chinese government. At least I should stop my writing about the Chinese oppression. After I rejected, the police officer told me, "We will educate your daughter as a communist loyalist against you and the other Uyghur people. Your daughter would be #1 enemy of you."
We've seen journalists writing about it. We've seen organizations like Human Rights Watch, independent researchers out of Australia, Germany, the United States. We've seen organizations under the UN. All of these organizations have confirmed that this is something that is happening. Upwards of 1 million people are being held in internment camps. And where's the global outcry? There's really no consequence so far for the Chinese government for perpetrating this on its own people.
Chinese government believe that international community are very weak to cope with Chinese oppression and genocide because China believes its military and economic power.
The Chinese government has put a lot of money behind winning over Central Asia and the Middle East. They have, incorporated a number of these countries into their Belt and Road campaign, basically their international development campaign. And it's really hard for these countries to walk away from that sort of source of income and economic partnership.
A lot of these projects are funded because a Chinese bank is offering the loan. So you have this situation where all the money eventually goes back to China and all the leverage is with China. Some countries are starting to realize that this is not the best deal. There are real benefits, but they also have to weigh it against the political influence China might be able to have in terms of leverage.
This is about a very powerful government that has a stated ambition to essentially reprogram and wipe out a practice of a religion and a culture within its borders.
States certainly won't stand up against China on things such as what's happening in Xinjiang. People have to put pressure on their politicians, whether it's Americans in the United States or any country. People have to care and say, this is not okay.
There's only one thing we can do: be patient, be united around good things, good people, and to never lose the hope about the future.
In Vietnam, we have to ask the permission from the government before we do anything. The censorship system abused their power to threaten artists, to silence them. Xin ông cho chúng tôi được đưa, để ông cho chúng tôi được làm việc. Writing songs and playing music is my life, and that's the only way that I can express myself freely and completely. I don't realize there is a censorship system until when I released my first album. I have to submit the content for the censorship system, and they censored my songs. One of my songs was repealed from the album. They said, if you keep wearing this clothes to perform, I will ban you from singing in public forever. So it shows that they have a lot of power to threaten artists. It makes me really angry inside, but I didn't know what to do to change it. A friend of mine just gave me an idea. He told me, if you want to change the censorship system, why don't you nominate yourself for the National Assembly election as a candidate independent from the Communist Party? 2 weeks after my nomination, the police came to raid my concert, and they published the news on their magazine to let people know that I am banned from singing in public. Since that until now, no one dared to invite me to sing in Vietnam. After that, I have been under surveillance many times, and I always feel not safe when I go out, when I run for the election with the arm that I can change the censorship system and I can raise the awareness for people about the political participation rights. I keep wondering myself, why artists need to censor? Why art and music, which is no harm, need censored? I always think artists have a mission with their society, that is raising the awareness.
그리움과 뜨거운 경모의 정을 담아 위대한 김일성 동지와 김정일 동지께 가장 숭고한 경의와 새해 인사를 삼가드립니다.
There's a new and unconventional effort
to get information into North Korea
by sneaking information into the country on USB drives.
Human rights activists are now collecting old USB sticks,
urging people to donate their old flash drives by popping them in these slots.
pack it with information, whether it's Wikipedia,
movies, TV shows, ebooks.
in a bid, obviously, to undermine the regime's lies and propaganda, which it feeds to its own people every single day.
To open up their eyes to the fact that there is a world outside what they've been led to believe.
And if you think about it, that is very dangerous for Kim Jong-un, because if people get a sense that the image of America that he has carefully painted for them is false, he could have huge problems.
이 USB에 희망의 정보를 넣어가지고 북한에 들여보내서 북한 주민들이 자유의 힘을 가질 수 있다는 생각을 저는 가지고 있습니다.
북한 내에 진실을 알리는 것이 중요할 뿐 아니라 북한 밖의 소식을 알리는 것도 중요합니다.
Of course, watching this information helped me to realize there was some humanity out there.
When we can educate and enlighten North Korean population with outside information, so that if North Korean people can have ability to compare the North Korea with the rest of the world, then I think we can make a change inside North Korea.
Often people think changing the world is something grand. You gotta do so many things. But it can just simply starting by giving away flash drive you have. Because someone right now in North Korea can see outside information and dream of the world.
Please join us. Let's unite for the freedom of North Koreans.
Have you ever risked your life to achieve your dream? My dream was to freely walk the streets of my hometown wearing a pretty dress and earrings, and to express my own voice against injustice.
Hi, Jack. Welcome to the Oslo Freedom Forum.
Thanks for having me.
So I guess I'll just jump right in. It would have been great if we had had this conversation in Norway proper, but we'll do the best we can. So
and we'll do it again as well.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So this way you can meet some of the very activists that, because of Twitter, have a voice. So Twitter is such a positive tool for pro-democracy activists that are under authoritarian regimes. Regimes where freedom of expression does not exist. Regimes where there is no equivalent of a public square, where censorship and repression allow a stifling of all kinds of political speech. And Twitter has changed all this. Twitter has essentially permitted people who otherwise would not have had a voice to open up a national conversation in places where, sometimes they do it in their own name, sometimes it's pseudonymous, sometimes it's anonymous. It is truly an awesome responsibility that Twitter has allowed this to occur, that this exists. Now, we are very critical of Twitter sometimes. People, they pile on Twitter, but we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. And again, I stress the awesome responsibility of carrying the world's conversation is something that is definitely worthy of admiration. Now, what do we not know? What's it like on the inside?
Well, I think One of the most beautiful things about Twitter is that we have created it with the people that are using it every step along the way from the very beginning. You know, we started with a very simple idea, which is something we wanted to see and we wanted to use in the world. But as we gave it out to more and more people, they made it their own. And that started with the @ symbol, something that we did not invent, something like the hashtag, another thing we did not invent. The retweet, the ability to spread it to your followers. We did not invent the tweet storm and the thread, all came from the people using it as well. So inside the company, where I think our strength is we are able to observe very well. We're able to be, we're able to take critical feedback. We're able to see some of the patterns that emerge and then make them accessible to more and more people. So inside the company, you have a bunch of very empathetic people. You have people who are really good observers who want frank, critical feedback, because we know we're not building this for us anymore. We know we're building it for all these people that we serve. And I think after some of the tech early adopters, the first major constituencies to join the platform were journalists and activists. And every major constituency that joins in mass adds a new dimension to the service that we weren't expecting. We weren't expecting activists to use it. We weren't planning for it. And they had very different needs than we were originally imagining. Pseudonymity became very important. The ability to follow accounts became very important. The ability to DM and create communities around hashtags and watch what was trending in a particular country became very important. So these are things that, you know, we put out and then we watched, we observed, and we made better. And that's, you know, it's true to today. I think, you know, the biggest thing that we're wrestling with is all the new challenges that technology provides, such as misleading information and how people might be gaming the system in order to artificially amplify information or to make the conversation overall less healthy and less valuable in the end. So
if I can jump in there, the pseudonymity, you mentioned pseudonymity, and of course pseudonymity is essential for some of these activists who can't use their own names when telling truths about certain things in certain countries. Yet, even though pseudonymity has played a crucial role in protecting the activists in these oppressive regimes, it has also enabled authoritarian governments to manipulate the minds of millions of people by creating fake accounts, by spreading disinformation. In the case of, say, Russia, in the case of Saudi Arabia, the positive influence of Twitter is countered by these vast armies of trolls who serve the government, and they bring positive information down, negative information up, false information, you know, people with like 0 followers who spend all day tweeting, this sort of thing, and they attack independent voices. Many times they end up drowning out the voices of independent users, and a perception is created. I mean, in the case of Saudi, for certain, in the case of Russia, that the ruler of the nation is popular, is loved, is supported. And so suddenly the hashtags in favor of MBS or in favor of Putin are way up there, and they're trending topics. Yet the truth is totally different. How can and how will Twitter reduce the reach of these unverified accounts and stop these bad actors from abusing your platform? I mean, how do you create the balance between an online public square filled with independent voices and one filled with trolls and with fake accounts?
I appreciate the difference between anonymity and pseudonymity. Anonymity feels a lot more random. Pseudonymity is built identity. And that is what we want to value, and that is what we want to protect ultimately. And we have seen attacks against that, and they have been more anonymous attempts where people are creating accounts or states are creating accounts in mass, and whether they be bot-driven or a organization of humans that have an agenda, they take on similar patterns, which is trying to game our system, specifically around trends, in order to artificially amplify information or a trend that just doesn't naturally exist, doesn't organically exist. And in the early days, we just were not prepared to recognize this or handle it. Whereas today we are. We've taken a lot more action on recognized patterns, just looking not at the accounts themselves, but looking at the network between the accounts, looking at where these accounts might come from, look at how new the accounts are and how quickly they get up to speed in terms of one particular agenda, one particular hashtag, one particular message, and then acting much faster on it. And I think it's really important, and we believe it's critical that in order, in the course of work of, identifying these networks of artificial amplification and then actioning them, taking them down, we have to be transparent. We have to be open with what we found, what we did, and what we're looking for in the future. And each one of these comes with a risk as we disclose it, because as you disclose some of these risks, you're also showing some of the holes in your system and showing how others might be able to take advantage of it in the future. But we've gotten much better at staying steps ahead of some of these attacks. So that's one, is just looking at the network. Another is looking at the incentives of the product, looking at the product surfaces themselves, and are they still serving the original intent? Trending topics, for instance, has been an area that people have focused on, both in terms of seeing what's happening in the world and seeing what's happening within their community and their country, but also as a vector for attack and a vector to influence and shift minds. And there's certainly a lot we can do to recognize what's happening within that network, but there's a lot more we can do to make the product a lot better, to add more context, to show more of the connections, to enable people to drill down further so they can see what's really happening. And then, of course, labeling of both accounts and tweets. As we have credible information to determine whether this account might be state-owned or state-associated, whether these accounts might be new, whether they might be controlled by an API endpoint or a bot versus someone on their phone who's opening their phone with a biometric. These are all signals that we can use to make the credibility of accounts, and therefore the credibility of their information, at least much stronger, but more transparent ultimately, so that people can make decisions for themselves when they see these trends, when they see these particular accounts, and know that this message carries with it a different degree of consideration that people have to be aware of. So focusing on the network, focusing on the product surface area, making that better, and then adding context and credibility where we can determine it is how we're going after this.
It's excellent that Twitter is taking this seriously, because for some of these governments, control of the flow of information, control of propaganda, the use of disinformation and misinformation is an absolute existential subject for them. If they lose control of that, they could lose control of their country, and they're literally lose control of the government. If we take the Saudi example, they've taken it so seriously that they put spies inside the Twitter machine. They had engineers hired by Twitter who they had essentially propped up and placed there. And in 2015, Saudi agents were discovered to have infiltrated Twitter. And their goal was to get into the back end and identify to be able to identify specific people who were tweeting against the Crown Prince. When this was exposed, the message sent, literally, people on Twitter, users felt naked. They literally, it was so chilling that human rights activists and dissenters, especially from the Middle East, could be identified this way and exposed, and ultimately arrested and God knows, in some cases, disappeared. What measures has Twitter taken to ensure that this sort of thing doesn't happen?
I think it's so from a system standpoint, everything I mentioned around strengthening our system, applying more machine learning. Years ago, we had to do this in a very mechanical way. And that can be slow and it can be super lossy in terms of us just not seeing everything. But now we are applying machine learning in a much more fulsome way. We're able to see a lot more. We're able to share with our peers what we're seeing and what they're seeing, which gives us more confidence that this is an action by a particular group that is not authentic and not genuine. Whereas in the past, we probably weren't doing enough of that. And it's often the case that this is not an attack against any one system. It's an attack against many systems to make sure that people are seeing it across different products and services. I think it's really critical that we maintain a connection and collaboration with journalists, with civil society, with activists, and getting constant feedback and pointers too. Because we're looking at one particular thing, which is how the system is working and the patterns that emerge on top of it. But if we don't hear the other side, if we don't hear the questions, if we don't hear the dangers, if we don't hear the critique, we're going to miss some of the things that would be important to address and to figure out and to acknowledge. So it's really, really incredibly important that we maintain these open channels to make sure that we're seeing everything that we need to see, and when we're not, that people are holding us accountable to it and calling us out for it.
Right, but in this case, it was a social engineering hack. They literally, the Saudis put people inside Twitter. I mean, how do you stop that? How are you gonna? I mean, what do you do to stop the Chinese government from doing the same thing, or you know, any government who hires a firm that engages in a private spying agency, such as Black Cube or the people who created Pegasus out of Israel? How do you ensure that essentially the keys to that back end remain in the pockets of those who are going to protect the identity of these human rights activists?
Yeah, well, I fundamentally believe that security is not something that can ever be perfected. It's a constant race. It's a constant push to be 10 steps ahead of your attackers. And I think there are a few elements that are really important within that race. One is creating a lot of agility internally so that we can recognize flaws quickly and then fix them and advance them. Two is getting outside feedback and people who are watching from different angles and researching from different angles to actually see what's happening. And then third, making sure that we're building the right secure systems within our platform so that we can have trust in an untrusted environment. And there's a lot of newer technologies that provide for this. I mean, the whole spirit of Bitcoin, for instance, is to provide a trusted system in a distrusted environment, which is the internet. And those technologies will provide us new capabilities where we can do this internally as well and provide a lot more peace of mind in terms of us at the company, but also the people that are using our service, that this is something that even if you have untrusted parties entering in the system as workers, as people who are using the service, that it is still secure, it's still protected. And the more of those technologies we build in, the more of the technologies that are linked to an identity and a security system that you as an individual uniquely own, the more we can use biometrics to hook that up, whether it be Face ID or Touch ID or something that we're not considering right now. The more we're giving the individual the keys, the safer this whole system is going to be. And right now, we're just not in that state, but we are working towards it. And when I say we, it's the whole industry of the internet. And you see this most fundamentally in the work in Bitcoin and blockchain. And that's what gives me a lot of hope and a lot of peace of mind to help these issues and to help thwart these issues, is because the keys and the control will actually be more and more in the hands of the individual rather than a corporation or rather than a government.
The idea, I mean, shifting the conversation to building the future is definitely something I want to end with. But if I can go and discuss briefly, because again, it's very important to so many people in our community to put this question to you. Look, Iran and China are countries where Twitter is banned outright. Nobody in these countries can tweet. But officials from these countries, like from China or Iran's foreign ministry, they use Twitter to express the government's point of view. So essentially, the government minister can tell the world what the position is of the government, or misinform, whether it's about COVID or about anything else. Yet the people of that country can't use it. So why are you letting them use it, and yet they ban their own people? Isn't it hypocritical to allow officials to have verified Twitter accounts to promote the propaganda of, the Iranian and Chinese regime, while they ban their own people from access to your platform?
Well, there are people in China and in Iran that are using Twitter, that are seeing what people are saying, including their leaders on Twitter. And they're doing so through safe VPNs. They have friends outside of those countries and collaborators and colleagues outside of those countries who are also watching. And I do think it's important to show the dissonance of what's happening on the ground versus what the leaders are saying, to help hold them to account and to also see what they're doing. I do believe it's important at least to have their voices in the open, so that how the story of the country, how the story of the regime or the administration is being told to the rest of the world. And that information gives a much more credible fight. It gives more information with which to utilize and to strengthen the activism around. So it does, on the surface, it does feel dissonant that we would enable that. But I do think it's important to see as many of the voices as possible, especially the ones that you disagree with, so that you can understand how they're thinking and what they're trying to say and how they're trying to represent the whole of the people to the world, when in fact that is not how it should be represented. That is not the particular case. And that context that we also provide, I think, is important for the rest of the world. We just started labeling state-controlled media or state-associated media, and it gives a context to the rest of the world that this is associated with the government, who activists might be against. And having that context and giving that information to people, gives them a different judgment on what they're reading and what the intent is, and if there's an agenda behind it.
Well, you started labeling the officials from China, Russia, but then you also added France, United Kingdom, and the US. You've been going into what has propelled this decision to have wider information. Are you going to adopt this worldwide? Are all, when officials from different countries, are you going to have that as announced so that people know that? And if we can take one step further, there are state propaganda vehicles, like, for instance, RT. It's very popular in the United States, and very few people realize that it is actually Putin's network. It literally is Putin's network. It puts out information that Putin wants out there. And many times it's misinformation or false information. By the same token, you have TRT out of Turkey, and you have other state-owned vehicles from dictatorships that are pushing a particular agenda. And a lot of people, it looks like the BBC, it looks like CNN, it looks like something that otherwise you might think is credible, but in the end, it actually is not. RT is not credible, and yet people are disseminating it like it's a credible, privately owned network subject to the same kind of standards of journalistic ethics as we have in the West. Are you going to start labeling those as well?
We are. We wanted to start small. We wanted to start with more known entities that we could learn from, test out the system, and then as we understand it and we understand both the positives and also the negatives that we're improving, we can roll it out to more and more. And I think it's important that we do that smaller test, because we'll get feedback from activists on what's working and what's not working, and that's just critical to our work. If in the past we may have moved very quickly to cover the world with that, and And that would have been in error because it may have created more confusion because the product and the understanding of it just was not as robust as it needed to be. So I think it's really important as we take steps like this, that we take small steps and we allow them to grow, and we take in all the learnings and just try to understand as much as we can before we expand it even further. It's one of our greatest lessons over the past 5 years. Is to slow down a bit, pace it, and make sure that we are doing the right thing, integrating the critical feedback. And I believe we were one of the first to ban RT from utilizing our advertising systems in order to propagate their messaging. And we were also one of the first, if not the first, to ban all political advertising on our platform as well, with the principle of political speech should be earned and not paid for. So, you know, all of these represent ideas that we think are credible after talking with people, and then as we get more understanding about them, to roll them out and to scale them and to make them much more impactful and much more accessible by more people.
Well, it's all sounds like a lot of very good things that are happening. I want to note for some of the people that may not know this, that Twitter was one of the major global tech platforms that announced that they would be pausing when the Chinese regime had the Hong Kong national security law imposed, essentially making Hong Kong a jurisdiction of the Chinese Communist Party's legal system. They paused all data requests from the Hong Kong police. And this was from those of us from a human rights perspective, it was such an important step of you basically counting yourself as not being a part of the legal system of the CCP. Why was this an important thing for Twitter?
It was important. It was important for us because it's true to who we are. You know, we've had a long-standing relationship and usage with the people in Hong Kong, and we've also had a lot of experience and a track record of pushing back on governments that are egregiously going after particular journalists or activists and fighting for them. And we have a history of doing this, not just around the world, but also within our own country, in terms of making sure that we can take these actions, making sure that we can have transparency around any requests that governments around the world ask of us, and that we really fight hard for the people that are on our service. And you know, this one made sense immediately. It's something that we worked with our civil societies around the world to help understand and to strengthen our moves. And we want to make sure that in any of these actions that people have awareness of why we're taking it, and some of the upside and the downside of those actions for the company, for the service, and also for the people who might be using it.
Well, it was definitely something that was noticed by everyone in the human rights field. I want to go back to what you had started discussing when it comes to blockchain and building the future. In this past December, Twitter announced that you were going to be funding a small team of 5 open source architects and engineers and designers to start developing an open and decentralized standard for social media. So the goal was ultimately to be a client of this standard. Can you explain that to people who are not techies, who are not like blockchain enthusiasts? What are the risks of an internet that is not open, and what does it mean to having a decentralized standard for social media?
There's probably a number of you who remember the older internet, Usenet, IRC, Internet Relay Chat. And what was interesting, and that's the internet I grew up on. And what was interesting is how decentralized the internet was at that time. And then what was difficult about that decentralization was actually discovery, finding content, finding people that would be like-minded. And that is what Google represents. It's centralizing the discovery problem. It's what Facebook represents, centralizing a discovery problem. It's what Twitter represents as well, centralizing the discovery problem. And now we're in a world that blockchain exists, that Bitcoin exists, that decentralized technologies exist, so that now we can build the discovery problem on a much more decentralized foundation. And what I think that does is generally a lot of our value in the past was around content hosting. So we would host the tweets, we'd host the images, we'd host the videos. Blockchain and Bitcoin point to a future and point to a world where content exists forever, where it's permanent, where it doesn't go away, where it exists forever on every single node that's connected to it. And what that means is the job of content hosting goes away. The job of discovery is the most important thing. And we've had to really consider what that means for us as a company. What that means is we're not in the content hosting business anymore. We're in the discovery business. And we're going to have a particular approach on discovery, which is healthy conversation. Healthy public conversation that seeks to help people understand what's happening in the world, to have conversations about what's happening, and hopefully solve problems together. And what that means ultimately is we need to become a client of something much bigger than us. We need to enable people to contribute to a public blockchain. We need to be able to enable people to be able to pull and see from that public blockchain as well. And if we're able to do that, it's something that's really powerful and something that I think speaks back to the power and the original intent of what the internet could be, which is something that anyone in the world can access. Anyone in the world can make decisions around in terms of their engagement, in terms of what they own, in terms of what they see, in terms of what they share. And companies like us can build a business on top of that that contributes to that greater whole, but pulls from it in a way that's compelling to people. And we wanted to advance this. So we're going to hire 5 engineers and some folks to start building Twitter as a protocol. And one of the things we heard early on in Twitter's history is that this is so basic and so simple, it kind of feels like a protocol right now. It doesn't feel like a company. It feels more like a movement, and it feels more like a technology that I can use to build whatever I want to build on top of. And that was such a magic time and such a magic understanding of what Twitter was. And we want to get back to that, and we want to help the world get back to that as well. So right now we're in the phase of finding a leader for it, but this is a completely separate nonprofit from the company. This group will be tasked with building a protocol that we can use, but everyone else can use. And then we'll really focus on becoming a client of it so that we can build a compelling service and business on top of a much larger corpus of conversation that anyone can access and anyone can contribute to.
That's quite inspiring. Now, before I ask you one last question, I have to interrupt and ask. So in the background, I either hear a dragon or a king of the roosters, or I hear a massive parrot. What's going on? I mean, it sounds like I'm in a dragon's lair.
I'm in a more rural area, and there's a very proud rooster.
Okay, the rooster. Okay, interesting. Okay, so we got the technology and agriculture. That's quite nice. Aviculture, I should say. So, Jamal Khashoggi, who had attended the Freedom Forum in Norway months before He was murdered because he posed an existential threat to the control that Saudi Arabia's government and the Crown Prince had over Twitter, over the Twitter conversation in that country. People are going to learn in Brian Vogel's film that he was essentially killed because of Twitter. Currently, Omar Abdulaziz, a Twitter activist who was very strong in creating a counter to the disinformation campaign of the Saudi, his brothers are currently in prison there precisely because he was able to defeat the Crown Prince's trending topics. My last question is more of a request. Would you accept an invitation from the Human Rights Foundation to join the campaign for justice for Jamal Khashoggi?
Yes, absolutely yes. Jamal represented the best of what the service is, the intersection between journalism, between activism, between speaking truth to power, to holding power to account, and to influencing change and creating a public conversation around what needs the atrocities and what needs to change about organizations and regimes around the world. So this is really critical to us. It's really important to the world and something we will definitely stand for.
Jack Dorsey, thank you very much. I hope to see you in Norway the next time.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting you all in person.
So long.
Mwana wanjye aho uzajya uri hose ujye wibuka ko nawe uhamagariwe kuba intwari ubutwari twese buratureba ntibikiri iby'abayobozi b'igihugu bonyine cyangwa ingabo z'igihugu nawe muganga w'intwari uvura abantu hari gutanga uzirikana cyane ukajya
Have you ever risked your life to achieve your dream? My dream was to freely walk the streets of my hometown wearing a pretty dress and earrings, and to express my own voice against injustice. For this dream of freedom, I risked my life at a young age and escaped from North Korea to start my new life. When people think of North Korea, you might think of a dictator obsessed with the food, while people die in the streets due to hunger. You might also think of North Korea's nuclear weapons, causing tension in the Korean peninsula. But I would like everyone to know that there is so much more to my former homeland, North Korea. I was born in Wonsan on the east coast of North Korea. I grew up in a broken family. My parents divorced when I was 5, and my mother suffered from mental health issues. Both my parents passed away when I was young, but fortunately, my loving grandparents raised me. Thanks to them, I became a storyteller who embraces all the pains of the past and lives for the future. There are 3 main reasons why North Koreans defect. First, in search of food. Second, political asylum. Third, for freedom. In the 1990s, many people escaped from hunger and fled for food. However, in recent years, many young people are escaping for freedom so they may express themselves and freely fight against oppression. When I was in the North, I was punished many times due to the clothes and accessories I wore. I was forced to stand in the police station a whole day and write apologies for wearing such things. Wearing earrings and having long hair is completely forbidden in North Korea. There are police everywhere on the streets, almost every 200 meters, in groups to check what you wear and how your hair looks. For instance, I remember one day I went out wearing buka pants. The police approached me and started cutting my buka pants and my long hair in the middle of the street. It was a terrible experience that I would never forget. That was when I started asking myself, why can't I have control over my own body and express my beauty as a woman? As long as I was in North Korea, I would never have the most fundamental human rights, and I would never have control over my own dignity. I remembered the saying, I would rather die trying to live my dreams than to live a longer life filled with regrets. Therefore, at the age of 17, I decided to leave my country for freedom. On September 24, 2012, I stood before the Yalu River near the border of China. It was 3 a.m. and the freezing wind pierced my face. It was the day that I escaped from dictatorship to South Korea in search of freedom. But my challenges did not stop there. For me and many North Korean defectors, the settlement in South Korea is many times harder than escaping from the North. I started my new life in Seoul, South Korea, in an empty apartment with nothing, but only the clothes I wore, and a debt of over $6,000 to the broker of my escape. I had to study and work harder than anyone else to pay off my debts and survive in this new society. I did not even know the basics of how to live everyday life in a modern city. I still clearly remember that I was fired after 1 month of working at a bakery. There were so many items that I never heard of, such as egg tart, apple pie, and even pizza bread. I accidentally sold the expensive breads as cheaper ones. North Korea didn't have these problems. I made a vow to never again work at a bakery. After that, I had several interviews to find a job. These interviews were the first time that I faced implicit discrimination. Interviewers noticed my different accent and said they did not hire foreigners. If I had interviewed for a job for foreigners, they told me that they did not hire Koreans. This is a common occurrence for North Korean defectors in South Korea. And though I'm now a South Korean citizen, I faced a dilemma about my identity and asked many questions about who I am. Currently, there are 25 million people living in North Korea, and about 33,000 have escaped to the south. The media seems to focus mainly on negative issues related to the North Korean regime, not on the people of North Korea. Because of that, people's views of North Koreans are now that of someone who always needs help, not as a colleague to work with. I was faced with these obstacles, but there was a time during my escape which gave me the means and motivated me to overcome any challenge in front of me. While on the run for over 50 days through China and Laos, I ended up in Thailand, where I met a fellow defector who I will never forget. She was the one who showed me the infinite possibilities of human potential and mental strength. I asked her why she decided to escape. She said, I starved for 10 days because I had nothing to offer. I didn't even have enough energy to open my eyes. At that time, I thought I had to survive rather than wait for death. So I crossed the Yellow River in China to survive. It's not only her anecdote, but also many North Korean defectors' stories. One of the most beautiful aspects about North Korea is its people. Ordinary people like her. Just like what the fellow defector told me, we must survive rather than wait for death. This is true of 33,000 North Korean defectors who work harder than anyone else for a better life. I used to be ashamed to tell people that I'm from North Korea, but now I can confidently say that I am a North Korean defector, because even though there were so many obstacles, I never gave up on my dream. Now, I'm a YouTube creator with my own channel named Liberty21 to share that even a North Korean can enjoy pole dancing. And also now I'm here at the Oslo Freedom Forum as a speaker in English. We are survivors. We are fighters. In a capitalistic society, there are plentiful things you can buy. However, the mental strength of North Koreans cannot be bought anywhere. We should all recognize the resilience of North Koreans instead of only seeing them as victims of oppression. Just like how investors decided to invest in a company driven by the company's potential, we should all begin to see the potential of North Korean people. If North Koreans are provided opportunities, especially for defectors, we can all take initiative and lead our society and our country to a bright and free future. Thank you.
У нас конституция не под женщин. И у нас общество не созрело до того, чтобы голосовать за женщин, потому что у нас по конституции
we got used to think that men are power, but I can show that women are even more powerful than our men. The day when candidates for presidency print documents for registration into election commission, I brought my document instead of my husband. He was in jail at that moment, and his documents were not accepted. And it's normal for Belarus to put in jail people for their civil position. I didn't see another opportunity to support him, just to print my documents instead of him.
Congratulations. Oh, thank you. I'm not sure if I want these congratulations, you know.
I'm sure they registered me just to make love at me. But people, they supported me, and it was like a shock for authorities. So they just had to leave me to show that there is a hint of democracy in these elections. So they, at that moment, that they left the weakest person, as they thought.
I got an offer from Babarukas and Palace staff to join all the people around one candidate, and of course I agreed. So it was the unity not of 3 staffs, but the unity of all the Belarusian people.
I am a press secretary of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. I am a volunteer. It was requests from Svetlana for a political program for her campaign. And our experts, Alexander and Eugenio Krasulin, who is my husband, yeah, they are experts in program of UCP, United Civil Party, and they helped to prepare a program for Svetlana.
My program was very short and extremely understandable for all people. Freedom for all politician prisoners, change of constitution, and organization of new elections that will be free and transparent and fair. There were a lot of our initiatives that were organized to count real numbers of the elections. First of all, we call people to make pictures of their ballots. Thank you, yeah. And just to send them to a special platform where we could count them. During the whole election campaign, we persuaded people who are in election commission to count honestly.
Добрый вечер всем. И он действительно сегодня добрый. Вы знаете, я считаю, что мы уже победили, потому что мы победили свой страх, мы победили свою аполитичность, мы победили апатию и безразличие. А это, знаете, такие победы, которые важнее всех остальных побед. Очень важные победы, да, в жизни каждого человека.
We are getting reports that the main opposition candidate in Sunday's election night might be missing. Her staff has told Euroradio that they've lost contact with her and that her whereabouts are currently unknown.
She just had not so many options and she was forced to take the decision to leave the country. We understood that she experienced really some pressure. It was not easy time during the detention. We don't know what happened precisely. She's in Lithuania, she's safe, united with her family, and this is the main message for now.
Let me now introduce our distinguished briefer, Mrs. Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, a former presidential candidate and the leader of the National Movement for Democracy and Free Elections. Mrs. Tikhanovskaya, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, my country, Belarus, is in turmoil. Peaceful protesters are being illegally detained, beaten, and imprisoned. The protests themselves started after a cynical and blatant attempt by Mr. Lukashenko to steal the votes of the people.
Now I'm here doing my best to tell the world, to the whole world, about what's going on in the small country, but with brave people. I don't have hope. I am sure that we will win because we don't have another choice.
Do you feel now that everything you're doing here is still
about supporting him as well?
For sure. It's not about supporting him and other politician prisoners, but it's about supporting Belarusian people, about supporting human rights, about supporting our rights to speak, to stand, to clap, to elect.
Dear Oslo Freedom Forum participants, thank you for fighting for freedom and democracy. When my husband, who wanted to run for president, was jailed because of his desire to build a new country for life, I wanted to support him. And I gave my documents to the Election Commission. So my first step towards presidency was for love. And only after this, when I saw the support of Belarusian people, I understood that I can't give up what I have started and continue this election campaign. This election was different for a lot of reasons. First of all, because Belarusian people woke up and self-consciousness of Belarusian people has changed. And now we really understood that we don't want to live in this regime anymore. We don't want to live under this pressure anymore. We don't want a dictator to be a leader of our country anymore. And we understood this, and we understood that we will have to fight for our freedom. We will have to fight for our future. This year we are united, and we felt ourselves like a nation, not a separate people of one country, but a nation. We understood that we are together, that one for all and all for one. It is extremely important to fight for freedom and democracy, because freedom is given not by authorities, not by government, but it is fundamental freedom that is given by birth. What inspires Belarusian people on the streets right now? I think the feeling that at last they have, opportunity to prove that they are people, that they are nation, that they deserve to live in a free country, that they have right to be respected. They have right to be respected by our government. My future Belarus is free and safe. I'm not afraid to speak. I feel safe on the streets. The police in future Belarus is a respected profession. We know that they protect us but not beat. Authorities in my Belarus are working for people, for country, but not only for their pockets. My future Belarus is friendly to all the countries in the world. I'm asking world to be vocal about our situation, because when you are talking about us, when you understanding why we are fighting for our rights, while you are supporting us, it means that we are important to the world, and we are important.
The mission of the Human Rights Foundation is to defend human rights where they are systematically denied to people. As we just heard, for the past 26 years, Alexander Lukashenko's regime in Belarus has forbidden any kind of political opposition, jailed activists, censored journalists, and murdered political opponents. Since fraudulent elections on August 9th, the Belarusian people have risen up against this regime. Despite horrific police brutality, including the murder, beating, and torture of peaceful protesters, the people of Belarus have taken to the streets, demanding the removal of Lukashenko and new democratic elections. State companies have gone on strike, while Belarus's prized IT sector, which for many years remained politically neutral, has overwhelmingly backed the protesters. Several months after the election, hundreds of thousands of Belarusians continue to take to the streets. They have brought the regime to the brink, spooking Lukashenko so much that he has posed for photos brandishing a rifle. The protesters have remained resilient in the face of overwhelming odds. In an effort to support the protesters in their cause for democracy, the Human Rights Foundation set up the Belarus Solidarity Fund. So far, the fund has raised over $125,000. In partnership with several Belarusian human rights organizations, HRF sends all proceeds from the fund directly to peaceful protesters and activists working on the ground in Belarus who have been attacked, injured, and prevented from doing their jobs because of their support for freedom and democracy. We encourage everyone to go to BelarusSolidarityFund.com to learn more and donate to support freedom in Belarus. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Buika and I'm here to sing for all of you guys, but also for the Oslo Freedom Forum speakers. Thank you so much for your fight. I give you my heart.
Y cada paso que doy es un regalo del cielo, pues por muy lejos que vaya, me acompaña tu recuerdo. Y ya que el mundo sigue en pie, y ya que somos tú y yo, y aunque haya habido distancia entre los dos, yo hoy voy a cantarle a tu amor, porque hoy yo me lo merezco. Y hablaremos de más, sin prisas, pausas ni miedo. Y te pediré locura, ay, y te daré todo lo que tengo aquí. Y ya que el mundo sigue en pie, y que seguimos siendo tú y yo, y aunque hayan pasado cosas entre los dos, hoy yo voy a cantarle a tu amor, porque hoy yo me lo merezco. Yo voy a cantarle a tu amor, porque hoy me lo merezco, sí. Yo voy a cantarle a tu amor, porque yo me lo merezco. Hey, yo voy a cantarle a tu amor, hoy yo me lo merezco. Amor para todos.
For the past 2 days, you've borne witness to those who are challenging oppressive and corrupt regimes across the world. These individuals are operating under extremely difficult physical and mental conditions, often putting their lives at risk. It is thanks to their passion and resilience that we can hope for a better future, where human dignity is respected and where human rights are at the top of the world's agenda. But resilience is strengthened with the support of a community. And this is exactly what we strive to create at the Oslo Freedom Forum. A gathering of activists and human rights defenders who can rely on each other and unite in standing up against tyranny. By listening to their stories of those who dedicated their lives to overcoming tyranny, you have elevated their cause. We ask you to continue by sharing the stories you've heard, by supporting them, and using whatever is in your power to make their voices heard. We will be closing this conference with a ceremony honoring the legacy of Vaclav Havel, the Czech dissident playwright, poet, and late chairman of the Human Rights Foundation. During this ceremony, 3 laureates will be presented with the Vaclav Havel Prize for creative dissent.
mwana wanjye saro ryanjye ntuzabogora ayo mata y'urwererane mu nkongoro y'ibwami umwami uruta abandi yaduterekeye ku ruhimbi kuwa turukesha niwe muhanzi umuhanzi mukuru n'Imana mwana wanjye uzabitwara ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabigenzi wunganira imanzi uzabigenzi ushyigikira mwana wanjye aho uzajya uba uri hose ujye wibuka ko nawe uhamagariwe kuba intwari ubutwari twese buratureba ntibikiri iby'abayobozi b'igihugu
I have hope because without hope it is impossible to live.
Vaclav Havel, the poet, the playwright, the dreamer, the revolutionary.
The Vaclav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent.
Because dissenting is the best verb to conjugate liberty.
This award is hope and a message to those voices that are out there that no one is speaking for them.
Dictatorship is not a political issue. It is a moral issue.
governments and dictatorships are so scared of art.
They want to close my mouth because I choose the most peaceful tool to criticize them. I choose poetry, verses, words.
Theater has got power. We have got power to provoke emotions and start debate immediately.
So I would like to dedicate this award for the voiceless.
Even though we may be going through great darkness, it's up to us to realize that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Vaclav Havel said, "Hope is not the conviction that things will turn out right, but the certainty that what we do without caring what the result will be."
And we together can change our society.
Describing Vaclav Havel's legacy is not an easy task. Beyond what was said and written about him, a dissident, politician, writer, statesman, Havel was a Democrat devoted to the cause of human rights. But Vaclav Havel was even more than that. He became a symbol. He became the image of creative freedom, imprisoned by a tyrannical regime. Vaclav Havel's legacy encourages us to strive for high ideals and fight for them relentlessly, without compromise. While this can certainly not be easy, anyone aspiring to live in truth can embody the spirit and memory of Havel.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to present our first Vaclav Havel International Prize for Creative Dissent to Kizito Mihigo of Rwanda. This is tragically the first time a Havel Prize is awarded posthumously. But we are not here to mourn. We want to take this opportunity to celebrate Kizito's life, musical talent, and courageous commitment to what Havel called living in truth. Kizito was born in Kibeho in southern Rwanda, the third of 6 children. Both his parents were ethnic Tutsis, an oppressed minority which suffered discrimination under a dictatorial regime dominated by the majority ethnic Hutus. Kizito was forced to confront racial discrimination from a young age as he entered a school system which maintained official ethnic quotas of students. In an early sign of resistance to oppression, a young Kizito refused one day to be counted in any ethnic category. When he was confronted by his teacher, Kizito offered a cheeky response. "My ethnicity is yet to be mentioned. My family is rich because we have a generator at home." Soon, however, Kizito's childhood was shattered by unimaginable horror and violence. In April 1994, Rwanda experienced the worst genocide seen in the world since World War II. More than 800,000 people, mostly minority ethnic Tutsis, such as Kizito, but also moderates from the ethnic Hutu majority, were slaughtered over the course of 3 months. The family joined millions of fleeing refugees, witnessing unimaginable horrors. But no less than 79 of Kizito's relatives were slaughtered, including his father. The family would return to Rwanda only after Tutsi rebels, led by Paul Kagame, defeated the genocidal Hutu regime and ended the genocide. It would take Kizito several years to overcome his desire for revenge. And remarkably, through music and his Christian faith, he eventually forgave his father's killers. The genocide did not break him, it made him stronger. At 16, he was one of the few people to contribute words and music to Rwanda's new national anthem. He went on to study music at the prestigious Conservatoire of Paris and eventually launched a foundation which promoted peace and reconciliation through arts and music in schools and prisons. In March 2014, a month before the annual genocide commemoration, he released a song entitled "The Meaning of Death." It was a crescendo of his message of peace and reconciliation. The song was quickly banned because it called attention to atrocities committed against civilians by the ruling party after the genocide. Kizito was then abducted by regime state security agents and held incommunicado for 9 days. Kizito later revealed that police threatened him with a life sentence or death in prison if he did not plead guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and released on presidential pardon after serving 3 years. However, he was forbidden from leaving the country, and his foundation was shut down. The country had become an open-air prison for him. In February 2020, he attempted to escape Rwanda, but was arrested and accused of attempting to join anti-Rwanda terror groups outside the country. He died in a police cell on February 17, 2020. He was just 38 years old. With Kizito dead and discredited, the regime wants us to forget about him and move on. Before his death, Kizito said that while he knew that releasing the song would lead to terrible consequences, he could not help but release it. The message is sometimes more important than the messenger, he said. We will never forget that Kizito was a light onto this world snuffed out by Paul Kagame's regime. We will never move on until justice is done. We will now play the last song released by Kizito before his death. It is called Amahoro Imana, Hymn to Peace and Reconciliation.
Imana munyarwanda singiza yamamaze kuko yatwigeretse ikaduherekeza muri uru rugendo rutagatifu twitoza kongera kubana mu mahoro no mu buvandimwe dukesha ijuru. Singizwa mubyeyi wacu, singizwa wowe wahaye abantu ubumwe. Nibyo twakoze ni wowe wabidushoboje nyagasani. Singizwa mubyeyi w'impuhwe n'imbabazi, tukwigiraho kubabarira no kwiyunga nyabyo.
It is my honor to present the Vaclav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent to the artist Bao Ditao from China, a political cartoonist and human rights activist. His choice to live in truth began when he was a teenager, growing up in China, and realized the fanatical level of censorship around the subject of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Instead of becoming a lawyer, he became an artist, a far more dangerous career choice. For years, his artwork has unmasked the lies of the Chinese regime, rallied support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement, advocated on behalf of political prisoners in China, and exposed the Chinese Communist Party's censorship of the coronavirus pandemic. He is best known for his online cartoons, which are shared on Twitter. Because of his activism, for years he was pseudonymous and elected to wear a ski mask to conceal his identity at art events. He came out this past June. He lives in exile in Australia. Bao Ditao is a creator of the London flag, which became a powerful protest symbol that inspired and mobilized the global community to stand in solidarity with last year's protests in Hong Kong. I must emphasize Protest art can galvanize and sustain a movement. This Havel laureate has made history. We award him the Havel Prize for a remarkable adult life devoted to dissent and to motivating protesters to continue to resist. We hope he continues to use art creatively to raise awareness for human rights. Ladies and gentlemen, Bo Di Tao.
Millions Hong Kongers took the street and protested for their basic rights and a fair election, regardless of the white terror from Beijing. Millions of Uyghurs are put into concentration camps, and they're tortured and forced to be laborers, like slaves. Millions of Tibetans lose their lands and the rights to practice religion freely. Many of them choose to set themselves on fire as a form of protest. Millions of Mongolians lost their rights to speak native tones and practice their native culture because of operation of China. Million refugees seeing no hope in Europe, even after fleeing from the war and environmental crisis from Middle East to Africa. Millions of minorities are suffering from systematic racism in America. The history of this world has not ended. The struggle of this world has not ended. Our world needs 1 million pencils, 1 million guitars, 1 million brushes, 1 million pianos to tell the story for the ones who do not have a voice. Our world needs 1 million artists to act, to draw, to paint, to sing for those who are trapped in oppression and injustice. So my fellow artists, don't make art, make change. It is such a privilege to be able to show your works in the gallery, to be able to play your music in a concert hall, to be able to screen your films in a theater. It is such a privilege to be able to create freely. So don't take freedom as granted. Don't just be satisfied as entertainers. And don't hide in the ivory tower of art for the sake of art. My fellow artists, don't make 1 million art. Make one change.
It is my honor to present the Vaclav Havel Prize for Creative Dissent to Omar Abdulaziz from Saudi Arabia. Omar is a political satirist and human rights activist from Saudi Arabia. He had to flee Saudi Arabia because of his criticism of the Saudi government on Twitter. He started a new life in Canada, where he deepened his commitment to being self-expressed and began doing the unthinkable. He began criticizing not just the Saudi government, but also the Saudi royal family and the crown prince. His satirical news show in Arabic, Say It and Walk Away, which is on YouTube, has a far reach with more than 53 million views. The regime has tried to stop him and used every imaginable tool, including extortion, bribery, surveillance, and hacking at the hands of the regime. It is important to note that as a result of his work, Omar's friends and family members have been arrested, imprisoned, and even tortured. As I stand here, his brothers are in prison, held for no crime. And even so, Omar persists. He has had threats to his physical safety, and the regime even prepared a kill team to disappear Omar in Canada. Nevertheless, Omar has persisted. Through his show, he has exposed the abuses and crimes of the Saudi dictatorship under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And Omar has raised awareness about ongoing repression and human rights abuses in the kingdom where political satire is considered a crime. He has displayed tremendous bravery in carrying out his work, His resilience is inspiring. Ladies and gentlemen, Omar Abdulaziz.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, Omar Abdulaziz is unable to join us because he is physically unwell. However, he has sent texts that he wanted read as his acceptance remarks. I am truly honored to be given such a prestigious award alongside great artists, musicians, and activists. I believe it is really a noble gesture to value artwork and political satire as tools against authoritarianism and dictatorship, and to celebrate art that serves the struggle for basic human rights and civil liberties for our peoples. What we creative dissenters say resonates with people, not because we're exceptional or because we are different, but rather because the people can relate powerfully to our work. They see that we reflect what they think, what they say, and what they feel. And then we make them laugh at some of this pain, and we create an opportunity to shift how we collectively think about oppression and injustice. Our success, when we have success, is a result from the support and faith that our audience has in what we say. This is what motivates me to keep going, to not let them down, and to continue the struggle against these oppressors until justice for my friend Jamal Khashoggi and those like him is served. I thank the members of the Vaclav Havel Prize Committee and the Human Rights Foundation for this honor. Omar Abdulaziz.
فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان لا انا بصرخ يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان لا انا بصرخ واكتب وابعت واتكلم واسمع يا معلم واكتب وابعت واتكلم واسمع يا معلم انا المواطن نقط 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 رقم قومي نقط 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 محل الاقامه نقط 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 بجوار البنزينه انا المواطن نقط 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 رقم قومي نقط 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 محل الاقامه نقط 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 بجوار البنزينه بصراحة حرام تعملوا فينا نقط ونقط ونقط وتطلعوا نقط ونقط أهالينا عملتوا انتخابات وكلها نقط 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 وشلتوا وحطيتوا حاجات نقط ونقط ونقط بصراحة حرام تعملوا فينا نقط ونقط ونقط وتطلعوا نقط ونقط أهالينا عملتوا انتخابات وكلها نقط 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 وشلتوا وحطيتوا حاجات نقط ونقط ونقط يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان لا انا بصرخ يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان يكون فعل مكانه مش جبان لا بتهن واسكت زي زمان لا انا بصرخ واكتب وابعت واتكلم واسمع يا معلم واكتب وابعت واتكلم واسمع يا معلم انا المواطن نقط 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 رقم قومي نقط 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 محل الاقامه نقط 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 بجوار البنزينه انا المواطن نقط 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 رقم قومي نقط 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 محل الاقامه نقط 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 بجوار البنزينه.
Fight the power. The more they go violent, the more we make music, the more we sing, the more we make art.
Thank you for joining us over the past 2 days. It's been a wonderful Oslo Freedom Forum, despite the challenges of doing a solely online event. If you've liked what you've seen here, please help us amplify these voices and help multiply the impact of the speakers, the activists, and the technologists that we've brought together here. Please share their talks widely. Please consider supporting their work directly. And if you want to learn more about the Oslo Freedom Forum, or if you'd like to attend in 2021, please visit oslofreedomforum.com. There you will also find an archive with hundreds and hundreds of talks, wonderful talks from speakers who've been there in the past. And if you'd like to become involved with the Human Rights Foundation, I invite you to visit hrf.org. The dates for the next Oslo Freedom Forum will be online in the next couple of months on the website. Everyone can play a role. Everyone must play a role if we are to be successful in the struggle against dictatorship and authoritarianism. Again, thank you so much. So long.
igikanu kibaga umusore w'igituza agenetse ibyuma rutegesha rwakamanzi ndimwe y'amashyengo ngahore mwana wanjye uzabintwara ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ngiye kurugutura uzarubera intwari uzaba ingenzi wunganira imanzi uzaba ingenzi gusa ikivi kimena mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ngiye kurugutura uzarubera intwari uzaba ingenzi wunganira imanzi uzaba ingenzi gusa ikivi kimena
kibondo ngiyi impano iruta izindi igihugu cyacu Imana yaduhaye tutabiyisabye tutanabihisemo twavutse dusanga turi abanyarwanda dusigasire uwo murage mwiza twahawe n'iyaduhanze dukunze ikatwifuriza ineza ikaturaga umunezero mwana wanjye saro ryanjye ntuzabogora ayo mata y'urwererane mu nkongoro y'ibwami umwami uruta abandi duterekeye ku ruhimbi ese natubona ngeze anirenze kuririmba kuwa turukesha niwe muhanzi umuhanzi mukuru w'Imana mwana wanjye uzabitware ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabirenzi uzabirenzi wunganira imanzi uzabirenzi usikibikira mwana wanjye aho uzajya uba uri hose ujye wibuka ko nawe uhamagariwe kuba intwari ubutwari twese buratureba ntibikiri iby'abayobozi b'igihugu bonyine cyangwa ingabo zikirinda nawe muganga b'intwari uvura abantu mwarimu nawe urera uzirikana cyane ko ari wowe mushumba w'intwari z'urwejo niba uri umuhanzi w'indirimbo izakubera inzira y'ubutwari niba uri umukinnyi w'umupira izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe mworozi nawe muhinzi izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe usudira nawe mukanishi izakubera inzira padiri furere n'umubikira izakubera inzira y'ubutwari pasitori porofete na shehe izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe ushinzwe isukuri izakubera inzira y'ubutwari wowe utwara abantu ku muhanda izakubera inzira y'ubutwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabirenzi uzabirenzi wunganira imanzi uzabirenzi usikibikira mwana wanjye uzabitware ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabirenzi uzabirenzi wunganira imanzi uzabigenzi usikibikira mwana wanjye uzabitware ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabigenzi uzabigenzi wunganira imanzi uzabigenzi usikibikira
igikanu kibaga umusore w'igituza gihanitse ibyuma rutegesha rwakamanzi imirimo y'amashyengo gahore
mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurugutura uzarubera impano uzabigenzi uzabigenzi wunganira imanzi uzabigenzi usikibikira mwana wanjye uzaba intwari ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurutura uzarubera intwaro uzabirenzi uzabirenzi w'umwami imanzi uzabirenzi ushyigikira kibondo ngiyi impano iruta izindi igihugu cyacu Imana yaduhaye tutabiyisabye tutanabihisemo twavutse dusanga turi abanyarwanda dusigasire uwo murage mwiza twahawe n'iyaduhanze dukunze ikatwifuriza ineza ikaturaga umunezero mwana wanjye saro ryanjye ntuzabogora ayo mata y'urwererane mu nkongoro y'ibwami umwami uruta abandi yaduterekeye ku ruhimbi ese ntacyo warageze irenze kuririmba kuwa turukesha ariwe muhanzi umuhanzi mukuru n'Imana mwana wanjye uzabikora ndagukunda kandi nkunda u Rwanda niyo mpamvu ugiye kurutura uzarubera intwaro uzabirenzi uzabirenzi w'umwami imanzi uzabirenzi ushyigikira mwana wanjye aho uzajya uba uri hose ujye wibuka ko nawe uhamagariwe kuba intwari ubutwari twese buratureba ntibikiri iby'abayobozi b'igihugu bonyine cyangwa ingabo zikirinda nawe muganga b'intwari uvura abantu mwarimu nawe urebe uzirikana cyane ko ari wowe mushumba w'intwari z'urwejo niba uri umuhanzi w'indirimbo izakubera inzira y'ubutwari niba uri umukinnyi w'umupira izakubera inzira
We all want to help one another. Human beings are like that. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate, has goose-stepped us into misery and bloodshed. To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. Don't give yourselves to brutes, men who despise you, enslave you, who regiment your lives, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Dictators free themselves, but they enslave the people. Now, in the name of democracy, let us all unite!
Good morning. Or good afternoon, good evening. If you are watching somewhere else in the world on the live stream, my name is Andrea Austin and I work for the Human Rights Foundation. And I am excited, so excited to open the 2019 Oslo Freedom Forum. As you know, the theme of this year is Unite, and we ask and hope that you can connect with at least one other person during the next few days, start a conversation, build a meaningful relationship that hopefully leads to lasting collaborations. In fact, let's start right now. Introduce yourself very quickly, just to the person next to you. Just say your name, and that's it. Oh, I love it. Okay. Before we get into too many conversations, this is a starting point for later. Please wave to these people when you see them over the next few days. Oh, it keeps going. There's a good chance that the person that you just met is a philanthropist, an activist, a creative, a business person, a technologist, or someone who just really loves human rights. But it is this mix of people, this group, these conversations that you just started, and the conversations, the ideas that are generated out of them, this is what's going to affect real change. But before I get ahead of myself, we have to talk about some rules. And I know that there are activists and dissidents in this audience who are not exactly the best at following the rules, but please follow these. 1, turn your phone on silent. And 2, please, please, please be on time. We have many speakers who've worked for many months and traveled many hours to be here on this stage to share just in a few minutes a little bit of their story. And in order to give them the opportunity to do so, we have to keep the show rolling on time. So thank you in advance for being here. One other thing of note, on the next slide, you'll see a little bit of information about our Wi-Fi and our social networks. So start this conversation, continue the conversations you're going to have in person, online. I'm talking to you people on the live stream as well. We want you to be part of this. Share a lot, share often. And on that note, if you are going to be using and taking advantage of the Wi-Fi here today and sharing and starting these conversations during the talks, we ask that you try to sit toward the back of the room just so that the screens and the light from your screens are a little less distracting. Okay, let's keep the show moving. I'm very honored to introduce our next speaker. She is a true champion of human rights. Please welcome to the stage the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ine Eriksen Søreide.
Dear all participants, human rights defenders, ladies and gentlemen, it's always good when this time of year comes and it's time for the Oslo Freedom Forum. Last year, we marked the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we also marked that 20 years had passed since the adoption of the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. The celebration of these milestones provided many opportunities to reflect on the importance of human rights as a global standard and as a blueprint for what the world we would like to see. A rules-based world order founded on respect for the dignity and worth of all human beings. A world where we can claim our human rights freely and equally without discrimination. A world where we all have the right to stand up for others. And a world where we as states, through multilateral cooperation, through bilateral dialogue, we hold each other accountable to these obligations. I know that this world may be far from the reality most of you live in. And I, like you, share the deep concern about shrinking democratic space and widespread crackdown on fundamental rights and freedoms. But we are here because we believe and we have seen that change is possible. Through the tireless efforts and the dedication of human rights defenders, civil society, sometimes working with governments, but often facing resistance, we have made some notable progress over the last decades. The reach and the effectiveness of the human rights movement has grown. The protection of human rights in national law has increased, and the opportunity for remedy for those subject to violations has improved. By working together across regions and with the support of civil society, we have continued to develop the normative framework for human rights defenders, strengthening the protection of women human rights defenders and those working for the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights. We have condemned violence, acts of intimidation and reprisals, and called for the release of persons detained or imprisoned for exercising their human rights and fundamental freedoms. For these 20 years, Norway has been responsible for the annual resolution